Welcome back to Two Fiduciaries. We've got Jimmy here to my left. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. How are you doing?
Fantastic.
Great.
So today we're going to talk about the endowment effect, which is really an important thing to understand in personal finance because it relates to biases. So these sort of psychological side of the house here today. This falls under the camp of behavioral finance and these unconscious biases. There's a lot of them out there, right?
Absolutely.
And you see them play out with a lot of clients and probably even yourself, right?
No question. Yeah, I think so. Behavioral finance is something that's been around for a while. I think it's become substantially more popular in the last decade or so. But it's really helping better understand the intangible components to investing as opposed to the very easy to see stock is worth X, I paid Y, I have this amount of gain. How do I feel about that?
Right.
Right. The technical stuff is pretty easy to understand.
Yes.
This intangible components of what's going on inside of your brain is much more complex.
It really is. And, I came about seeing this through school at Kansas State. They really focus in on the behavioral finance side of the house. And it's really interesting to note that, that this is a bigger portion of personal finance than I think has ever been noted. Now, some of the research goes back decades,
right?
And that's the good news. We're not talking about fly-by-night type of concepts here.
Right.
There's some really, really good research out there, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, what is the endowment effect? The basic definition is it's an individual places higher value on an object that they own. And they place more value on that object than the same object owned by another person.
Yeah, I think it's something that one of the things that I've enjoyed in my study and reading of behavioral finance is that when you get to walk through some of these exercises yourself, you start to recognize and acknowledge the biases that you don't think that you necessarily have, but all of a sudden when you start reading through these exercises, and the mug's a great example here. That my mug is worth more than the mug that you have, even though they're the exact same because it's mine. And then you start thinking about this in your own life, and you start saying, "Oh my goodness, yes, this is something that I do." And guess what? It's okay. It's important to be aware of it.
That's right.
Everybody deals with these biases.
They are
to different degrees and extents, right? But
correct.
Everybody deals with them, and so I think really the point we're trying to drive home with this is like building awareness, right?
That's right. People aren't broken because they have this.
Right.
People are people because they have this. This is who we are.
Right.
And this goes back evolutionary wise. Like there's good research that shows there's an evolutionary reason why we have the endowment effect. But we're not going to get into that quite yet today. But we're going to go use this mug example as a real one that was tested and in an experiment done by some really good economists. So let's talk about that. So first of all, if you go back to, I think it's 1978, there's two folks named Stigler and Becker, and they established in the academic record that there's the long-term endowment effect. This can kind of be easy to understand. It's explained by there's sentimental attachment that people place onto things that gives them greater value than what they would really have otherwise.
Yeah.
So, geez, I mean, you could think of anything. Some great shoes that you had that you ran a marathon in, or your car that you have so many memories from, and you attach more value to it than what the market would ever bear.
I think it's interesting. My parents unfortunately had some water in their basement not too long ago, and we started taking stuff out. We find a bunch of my old stuff from as a kid, and my mom has put a substantial value on it. Although I don't think many people on the market would pay anything for my kindergarten projects.
Right.
But my mom has such a long-term value associated with this that she has continued to hold on to it for decades.
It's a great example of it. Absolutely. So then let's fast forward a little bit. I kind of referenced it before, the mug experiment. So Kahneman, Netsch, and Thaler, two of these guys are relatively famous. The middle gentleman, not so much in my book anyways. But Kahneman and Thaler, these guys are really rock stars when it comes to psychological finance and Uh, they're great economists
Right.
and very well renowned.
Both Nobel Prize winners.
Exactly. So they found out that there's an instant endowment effect as well. So it's like as soon as you are provided that mug, guess what? You place more value on it than what you probably ever realized. And they were able to quantify this and then compare it to the same mug owned by another person and the willingness to trade or pay for these things. They were able to establish that yes, this is real. This is not just, we're not just thinking this is real, but from an experimental standpoint, they've validated it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Daniel Kahneman is probably most famous for winning the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize, a lot of his work he put together and compiled into a book called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book I've actually read, and so it's, we read about the endowment effect, but there's so many different studies in the book.
Right.
That is a really enjoyable book to read. You can kind of pick it up at any point because they're just sort of like a bunch of interrelated studies, but you could read from the middle of the book forward. You could start at the end. But when you read through a lot of these studies that they go through here with the instant endowment or whatever the bias that they're talking about at that point in time, and they'll give you the experiment, and so you can sort of walk through it in your own head, and it's a really enjoyable book to read.
They're enjoyable, they're interesting, they're really fascinating. So we want to take this and we want to apply it now, the endowment effect and personal finance, and we want to kind of think about this in terms of some of the biases and the irrationalities that we'll probably all experience at some level or another.
Right.
So let's take them in order here. Inherited assets.
This is one we see quite often, right?
Absolutely.
Client comes in, they inherited assets from, a loved one, and they want to hold on to it. And then you start talking through, okay, why do we want to hold on to it? Is it because you think it's a wonderful asset that has a ton of room for appreciation? Or is it just because mom or dad or aunt or uncle or whoever might have left it to you, and it holds this really strong sentimental value to you?
It's really important to understand that and then recognize that, that doesn't mean that you have to release yourself of that asset. It just means that you have to understand why it is maybe that you're a little bit more attracted to it than you otherwise would be.
No question.
Second one on our list here is company-owned stock. So there's two versions of this. There's publicly owned stock, like we know stocks that are traded on the public exchange, and then privately owned stock, and this is ownership in a private enterprise.
Yep.
So publicly owned, right? Let's talk about this. Let's say I work for Ford Motor Company.
Yep.
And I have I've got through either RSUs or company-owned stock options. I own a piece of that company now. I want to hold on to that because I've worked so darn hard for this company. I believe in it. I really want to make sure that I am invested in the company that I work for.
I believe the work that I'm doing is really valuable in helping to continue to increase Ford's market share and the value of the stock, and the work that I'm doing is directly going to impact that, and therefore I am inclined to want to hold the stock.
These are things that we see all the time. So what's happening there is that people are placing that greater value on that object, and maybe again greater value than what they should. Maybe they'll be over concentrated in their portfolio if they hold too much Ford stock.
No question.
And that can easily happen, and that can be a problem in a portfolio design.
I mean, again, this is where you're sort of bridging the behavioral, the intangible, and the technical work of, does the stock really make sense, and how does it fit in under your full financial plan? When we're looking at your balance sheet and your portfolio as a part of your balance sheet, how much wealth is concentrated into one company, and does that make sense?
And then on the private side, one can easily understand this as well. You own stock in your own company. You've built it up. Perhaps it's making it up. You and your spouse have built up a nice small business. It's time to retire. We want to sell this business. We're going to go market it at this point in time. Is it possible? Is it likely that you will overprice it? The endowment effect says yes.
Yeah, I mean, and you can easily see how that could happen, right? In this example, this is a couple that has put in probably something like 30 to 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears into making this company successful and building a lifestyle off of it, and now they might place greater value on the company than what the market will really bear.
And then thirdly, an unwillingness to sell. So let's say you're in that kind of persistent hold mode on, say, a stock that you've gotten, whether it's one that you inherited, whether one that you bought yourself, or perhaps one that you and your advisor sat down together with and decided that was a good purchase. This is directly connected to another bias called loss aversion, which says, people don't want to sell something because they don't want to lose money, or they're not going to achieve the amount of money that they expected.
Right.
And so it hurts more to sell and lose
Right.
than it does to just hold.
Right. I mean, it's just like if you think about it from like an athletic perspective, it often hurts worse to lose a game than the feeling of winning a game. Yes, the feeling of winning a game gives you pride and joy, but it's usually not as extreme of a feeling as that of the heartbreak of a loss.
Well said. So these biases, they are often entwined with one another.
Yep.
And again, our takeaway here today is understand yourself, understand what's going on from a psychological perspective, so you can be a better investor. You can have a better take on your own personal finance.
Absolutely. Well said.
That's all we have for today. Thank you very much, folks.